Majority Leader.
Mr. President, it's been almost a year since Republicans passed the working families tax cuts. 1 year since Republicans delivered permanent tax relief to the American people and put more money in their pockets. And I'm proud to say that it's working. Mr. President, at the start of this year, hardworking Americans saw their take-home pay go up as the new tax law took effect. They saw its impact again in April when they filed their taxes, and many Americans saw a significant boost in their tax refunds. The New York Times interviewed 36 Americans and reported that, and I quote, "Many of the taxpayers said they had received their largest refund in years, allowing them to pay down debt, save more, or cover the cost of a vacation or a new bed," end quote. And Mr. President, last week we got yet more news that shows that the working families tax cuts is working. The Treasury Department released data showing that 90% of Americans who filed taxes this last year actually got a tax cut. So take a look at that, Mr. President. That's a pretty stunning number if you think about it. 97%, thanks to the working families tax cuts, 97% of taxpayers got a tax cut this year, collectively saving about $82 billion on their tax bills. And who was it? Who was it that benefited from the working families tax cuts, Mr. President? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's in the name, working families. Almost every one of the 97% of American taxpayers who saw a tax cut this year earned less than $200,000. Nearly 70% earned less than $100,000. So if you take a look at this chart, Mr. President, you'll be able to see just exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at the dark blue line, those are the number of people who are making less than $100,000 a year who benefited from the new tax deductions in this bill. And if you look at the light one, that's the number of people under $200,000 who got a benefit. And I'll get into each of those specifics here in just a minute, but I think it's important to point out that the beneficiaries of the working families tax cuts were working families. In other words, Mr. President, the Americans benefiting from this bill, who are people who got up every day and go to work to provide for their families. They're not rich. They're people who spend nights at the kitchen table putting together their budgets, trying to make ends meet and save a little bit for the future. And that's who Republicans were thinking about when we wrote the working families tax cuts. And as the numbers show, that's who's benefiting. Mr. President, I've said that the working families tax cuts is about putting more money in hardworking Americans' pockets, and that's exactly what this bill did. It let working Americans keep more of their hard-earned money, money that they would have to send to the IRS if not for the working families tax cuts, and that they can now spend, invest, and save as they see fit. Mr. President, the working families tax cuts delivered real tax savings to the American people through a number of tax relief policies. Permanent lower tax rates reduced Americans' tax burdens across the board. And the now permanently doubled standard deduction helped 127 million Americans reduce and simplify their taxes this year. Nearly 40 million families claimed the newly enhanced $2,200 child tax credit in 2025. And as you can see from the chart, Mr. President, almost all of those families had incomes below $200,000. And I said before, 2/3 earned less than $100,000. And again, that's from the enhanced child tax credit, which is the bottom number down there. Mr. President, the New York Times story in April on this year's larger tax refunds highlighted Nicole Mendoza, a 68-year-old Georgian who, quote, works a couple of shifts a week at a Cracker Barrel in Canton, Georgia to supplement her Social Security income and savings. All told, Ms. Mendoza said she earned about $38,000 last year and paid $551 in federal income taxes, end quote. And as Ms. Mendoza told the Times, and I quote, "I got back every penny," end quote. Mr. President, this year, millions of hardworking Americans like Ms. Mendoza were eligible for additional tax relief thanks to the working families tax cuts. Americans earning between $100,000 and $200,000 last year who took advantage of new tax relief in this bill saw an average tax cut of $1,250. Older Americans were able to take advantage of the enhanced senior deduction, which helped 35 million seniors this past year. And 7.5 million tipped workers were able to take advantage of no tax on tips. Fully 90%, Mr. President, of Americans who took advantage of the no tax on tips earned less than $100,000. 99% earned less than $200,000. And so if you look at the tipped wages, the number there on top, Mr. President, the dark blue graph there, I should say the dark blue bar represents the number of people who were making less than $100,000 who benefited from the no tax on tips. The lighter blue bar represents the number of people making less than $200,000 in their income this year who benefited from the no tax on tips. So look at that. I mean, 90% of people who get tipped wages get the benefit of no tax on tips, make less than $100,000 a year, 99% less than $200,000 a year. That is pretty stunning if you think about it. If you talk about actually working families out there, people who are trying to make ends meet, and those numbers, I think, represent just how important that particular provision was in the bill. And the savings they're seeing is significant. There was a bartender in Beloit, Wisconsin, said that he more than doubled his federal tax refund. Katie, who is a DoorDash driver in Oklahoma, said, and I quote, "It increased my refund from $300 to $2,000, end quote. Another DoorDash driver in Oregon said, and I quote, "No tax on tips has changed life. I worry less about being able to cover all of my expenses, and I'm able to work less, which is better for my health and family," end quote. Mr. President, that's the working families' tax cuts in action. And I haven't even talked about no tax on overtime, which, like everything else I've talked about this morning, is overwhelmingly benefiting middle and lower income Americans. Mr. President, last year Republicans promised to deliver lower tax bills for hardworking Americans. And the data released last week proves that is exactly what this bill does. The working families' tax cuts is delivering for working Americans. Mr. President, as they have every time that Americans have lowered taxes for working, the Republicans have lowered taxes for working people, Democrats have resurrected their dusty old talking points about tax cuts for the rich. I can't count the number of times that I've heard a Democrat senator say this bill was just about tax cuts for billionaires. Well, Mr. President, look at the data. Does this look like a billionaire tax cut to you? 75% of Americans taking the overtime deduction make less than $100,000 a year. 90% of those taking no tax on tips made less than $100,000 a year. And 97% of Americans who filed their taxes this year got a tax cut. Mr. President, this is real tax relief for hardworking Americans. And the American people are seeing it with their own eyes. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsterbrooks.
the Democrat leader. Thank you.
Soon to be. Ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this morning's inflation numbers reaffirm what the American people already know. Trumpflation is getting worse and worse with no end in sight. Trumpflation hit 4.2% last month, a 3-year high. Another month of Trump's illegal Iran war. Another month of Trump's tariffs. Another month of Republican control of Congress. And what does America get? A new all-time high for Trumpflation. Just about everything is getting more expensive. In the past year, the price of fresh produce has gone up 6%, meat 7.6%, electricity 6%, airfare 26.7%, and gasoline by a staggering 40.5% increase. Is it any wonder that polling this week found that 70% of American voters disapprove of Trump's handling of the cost of living? That number includes a whole lot of Republicans. Donald Trump promised to lower costs on day one, but nearly 17 months since taking office, he and his MAGA majorities in Congress haven't lifted a finger to lower American costs. But let's be clear. Republicans aren't just failing to address the affordable crisis, they're making it worse, actively making it worse. Republicans are driving up costs with their expensive tariff tax, with their disastrous war with Iran that's leading to record-breaking gas prices, with their trillion-dollar cut to health care, and with the rest of this radical, hard-right agenda that so misserves the American people. Trump's tariffs have cost American families more than $1,700 a year on average. American families have had to pay an additional $750 on average during these past few months just to meet the skyrocketing costs of gasoline because of the Iran war. And instead of focusing on helping Americans weather this dire financial moment, Republicans are helping Donald Trump get even richer. As Americans' costs go up, Donald Trump keeps putting his hand into the till to make money for himself and his families. Republicans are more concerned with Trump's golden ballroom than with helping America afford housing. Republicans would rather give taxpayer-funded payouts to Trump and his cronies through his MAGA slush fund than help Americans put food on the table. Republicans continue to fight for Trump and his corruption rather than lower costs for working families. On Pulte. Last night, Donald Trump characteristically and stupidly doubled down on his reckless decision to appoint Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence. The law, of course, requires the DNI to have extensive experience in national security, but Pulte doesn't have any. DNI, Director of National Intelligence, isn't an entry-level position, but Donald Trump is treating it like one by appointing Pulte. The only experience Pulte has is helping Donald Trump wage a crusade against Trump's political enemies. At a time when our nation is at war and is preparing for massive security events like the World Cup and America's 250th anniversary, we need a DNI who is committed to telling hard truths, not one who is committed to telling Donald Trump whatever he wants to hear. This is dangerous. Could be disastrous, having Pulte in charge. Now, David Prouty nominated to the NLRB. Today, the Senate Help Committee will consider the nomination of David Prouty to continue serving on the National Labor Relations Board. From his time working for the Major League Baseball Players Association to his tenure as general counsel for Unite Here and for an SEIU local that represented 175,000 workers, Prouty has spent a lifetime defending the rights of organized labor across the country. For the past 5 years, Prouty's been a force for reason, a voice for workers on the NLRB, even as Republicans try to undermine that vital institution, hurt working families, hurt the unions that represent them. Between August 2025 and January 2026, Prouty served as the only sitting member of the NLRB after Trump's unprecedented purge of the board's only other Democratic member, a great member, Gwynne Wilcox. and the expiration of the chair's term. Trump's gutting of the NLRB paralyzed it for the better part of a year until it regained a quorum. While I'm pleased Prouty was nominated for another term, Trump continues to try to undermine our workers and their right to organize by trying to stack the NLRB with partisan loyalists committed to shielding employees from accountability. I urge my colleagues to support Prouty's nomination so that workers have someone who will speak up for them on the NLRB for years to come. On our commissioner's letter, in addition to his attacks on the NLRB, Donald Trump has refused to nominate and confirm Democratic commissioners and board members to vacancies at numerous agencies that are required by law to have bipartisan members. It's outrageous. Every other Republican president has gone along with the fact that there have got to be a number of Democrats on these boards. Every other Democratic president has gone along that there got to be Republicans. Only Trump, once again, has smashed these positive bipartisan values. So today, I joined our Senate Democratic ranking members in calling on Trump and Leader Thune to start following the law and stop refusing to nominate or confirm these commissioners. Shortly after taking office, Trump launched an unprecedented purge of over a dozen Democratic commissioners and board members across the federal government. Officials who uphold election security, protect consumers, keep our roads safe, perform other vital services for America. Trump removed these officials without a second thought and has either left these crucial positions vacant or filled them with MAGA loyalists committed to serving him rather than serving the American people. Democrats will continue to call out Republicans for trying to undermine these agencies and the crucial services they provide to Americans every day. Yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks. President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, I ask to officiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum calls with respect to the Powell and Dahl nominations.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Mr. President, this is the 250th anniversary year of the founding of the United States of America, the greatest nation the world has ever seen. Agriculture has been a part of this country since our founding. And agriculture is the heart and soul of what we do in Nebraska. We must always work to support our farmers and ranchers. It's a privilege for me to be able to do so as a senator from the great state of Nebraska. However, these are tough times in our industry for agriculture. We have seen widespread drought and wildfires. We have seen commodity prices in corn and soybeans be depressed and input prices be high. This puts a lot of pressure on our farming families. We also, as recently as the last day or so, have seen more wildfires in the state of Nebraska, in the northwest portion of our state, around Chadron and Fort Robinson. Our governor is taking appropriate action to be able to help fight these fires, but it's in very rugged terrain and it's going to be difficult for our firefighters there. And so I ask that all Nebraskans and Americans keep the firefighters and all those impacted by these fires in their thoughts and prayers as we go through it. One of the other challenges we are now facing in agriculture has to do with one of the bright spots in our industry, and it's the beef industry. Now, the beef industry is the #1 industry in the state of Nebraska. We are the beef state. But this industry is being threatened by the New World screwworm. This is a parasite that we had wiped out back in the 1960s and is now making a reappearance. In fact, we have had 6 confirmed cases, 5 in Texas and 1 in New Mexico. They're in livestock, but the case in New Mexico actually involves a dog. This is why Mexico is taking the steps to prevent all livestock from coming across the border, including pet dogs, to prevent the spread of the New World screwworm. Now, today I am sending a letter to our Ag Secretary, Brooke Rollins, to encourage her to continue to expedite the steps we are taking to combat the New World screwworm. And the way we do that is by producing sterile flies that ultimately then wipe out the population here in this country like we did before. Panama has the only facility in North America right now that is capable of producing these sterile flies, and Mexico is set to have a facility come online later this summer. Panama is producing about 100 million screwworm sterile flies right now, and Mexico is distributing those. And then USDA is distributing about 8 million a week in the affected areas of Texas right now. So we're trying to combat that right now. USDA is also investing another $750 million in a facility at Morrow Air Force Base near Edinburgh, Texas, that when it comes along will be able to produce about 300 million screwworm flies a week to be able to help combat this. So with the roughly 100 million a week that are being distributed right now, we're working on it, but to get there, we need to have more, and this is where USDA's investment is so critical to be able to help combat this. So I appreciate the work that Secretary Rollins and USDA is doing, encourage them to continue to expedite this so we can combat this disease. I would also point out that all of these investments are in addition to what Senate Republicans did in the Working Families Tax Cut last year, where we added to the programs with regard to animal biosecurity and parasite mitigation. We actually were able to add about $233 million a year to USDA's budget in 3 different programs, which is 7 times the level of funding that was being done before. And again, all of this to help make sure we continue to protect our strong agricultural industry in the United States. And of course, as I always remind people, food security is national security. In addition, one of the things that we've been able to do is have Secretary Rollins and Deputy Secretary Fordyce come to Nebraska to see the damage that was done by the previous wildfires. The previous wildfires burned about 1 million acres in Nebraska and have displaced tens of thousands of cattle, as well as sadly costing a life of one Nebraskan who was caught in that fire. One of the things farmers and ranchers have told us is they need to have flexibility, not regulatory red tape, when it comes to this recovery. And I'm happy to report that USDA is working with farmers and ranchers to provide that flexibility. One of the areas, for example, is that a lot of fencing was destroyed, and the USDA is giving us flexibility to be able to replace that fencing with different sizes of fences. The regulations, again, and somebody had some reason for it in the past, but required that you had to replace the fencing with the exact same post fence, and that's not all available given the widespread damage, so we're getting some flexibility to replace it with different size fencing. I am also introducing this week the Fence Act, and this is a bill, okay, I'm going to get the exact word of it right here. This is the fence flexibility for our farmers and ranchers to be able to replace the fencing that they have lost with electronic fencing. So we have collars, for example, we can fit cattle with that can do virtual fencing. So the Fence Act would allow for this to be able to get dollars from the Emergency Conservation Program. And so another tool that's available for our farmers and ranchers to be able to recover from these fires. In addition, I also want to credit Fish and Wildlife and USDA for working to open up the Valentine National Wildlife Refuge for grazing as well, to be able to help our ranchers out from that standpoint. So a lot of work going to recover, help our farmers and ranchers recover from these terrible fires. In addition, in the Working Families Tax Cut, I mentioned the money that we're putting toward biosecurity. We also made a number of great improvements for agriculture. We were able to make the death tax exemption permanent. That's important to allow for farmers and ranchers to be able to pass on the family farm and ranch to the next generation. It's one of the reasons why I say that our farmers and ranchers are the original conservationists, because they want to pass along that family farm or ranch to the next generation so they take care of the land and their animals. But the death tax could get in the way of being able to do that. By making that death tax exemption permanent, we're assisting farmers and ranchers in being able to pass along that ranch, and about $200 billion in farm and ranch assets will now go to the next generation of farmers and ranchers and not to the government. So this will assist them, and that was all done in the Working Families Tax Cut. We were also able to update reference pricing for things like corn and soybeans, especially given the tough time for our row crops there. This is especially important, but we were able to update that reference pricing for the first time in 11 years. So that was an important thing we got done in the Working Families Tax Cut. We were able to renew the 45Z renewable fuel tax credit. Renewable fuels are a win-win-win situation. Consumers save money at the pump. Last time I filled up with 10% blend of ethanol at my local grocery store, I saved 55 cents a gallon. It helps clean up the environment, and it's also good for our farmers and ranchers. So promoting renewable fuels is something that we want to continue to do, and we were able to renew that 45Z tax credit to be able to encourage companies to invest in renewable fuels. We were able also to double the amount of money for trade promotion. In Nebraska, about a third of everything that we grow and raise goes overseas. We're the largest beef exporting state, for example. And so we want to have more trade relationships. We doubled the amount of money for programs like our foreign market development and market access programs, initial $285 million to be able to open up those trade opportunities in markets around the world to be able to help our farmers and ranchers. And then we also doubled the program for our new farmer and rancher program from 5 years to 10 years to be able to help out those new producers coming into the industry to be able to take advantage of some of the benefits in that program and give them a leg up as they start their careers in agriculture. So these were all great things that we did in the Working Families Tax Cut, and there's actually many, many more things we did for agriculture in there. Having said that, we still need to get a 5-year farm bill. Our current farm bill authorizations run out September 30. We've been living on extensions. Our farmers and ranchers deserve the certainty of a 5-year farm bill. Now, I'm pleased to report the House has passed their version of the Farm Bill, and it includes some of my priorities. Priorities around things such as rural micro-entrepreneurship, around flood resiliency, my FIDA Improvement Acts, which would help us deter Communist China from buying farmland around our sensitive military installations, like Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota or Fort Bragg in North Carolina. So we need to get a 5-year farm bill done. Senator, my esteemed colleague from Arkansas is the chair of the Ag Committee, and he has been to Nebraska to hear directly from farmers and ranchers about our priorities for the Farm Bill. And I know he is working diligently to be able to get that Farm Bill passed. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that we must work together to find common ground and get this passed. Again, this is not only just about making sure that our farmers and ranchers have that certainty of a 5-year Farm Bill, but food security is national security. This is a national security issue as well. So it's very important that we get that done. Also, in the Farm Bill, I'd like to see one of my priorities with regard to fair labels. One of the things that we have seen, Mr. President, is that products are being put on the market that market themselves as one thing but are not really. My Fair Labels Act would address this specifically with regard to meat. We don't want something that is grown in a petri dish or something that is actually a plant to be labeled as meat or beef. Consumers should know exactly what they're consuming. And so my Fair Labels Act would require that if you're real beef or real pork or real chicken, you can say that on the label. But if you're not, if you're a plant-based product, if you were cultured in a lab, you cannot claim that title of being meat. This is one of the priorities that would make sure that not only would we be properly representing agriculture, but consumers would know exactly what they're purchasing. Also, one of the things that I did when I was governor of Nebraska is had the SNAP Next Step, which is encouraging our families on SNAP to be able to get better paying jobs by helping them with job coaching, resume writing, things like that. This would be another thing that we could add into the Farm Bill, since a lot of that Farm Bill, actually most of the spending in it, like 80% of it, actually has to do with the food stamp program, the SNAP program. This would be a great way to be able to help those families be able to reduce their dependency. When I was governor, of the families that participated in that, 60% were able to end their need for food stamp, and the other 40% reduced their need for food stamps. So that is a great way to be able to do it. And then finally, another thing that we can do to be able to help agriculture is pass E15 all year round. Again, Adrian Smith, one of my esteemed congressmen from the state of Nebraska, has helped pass this in the House. It is now for us in the Senate to be able to pass this. And I would point out that we have actually had E15 all year round through emergency waivers from the EPA for the last 8 years. The refineries who are worried about this, again, the sky has not fallen. I believe that there is an opportunity for us to find common ground to be able to get this passed in the Senate. This is important, again, for our farmers who would like to have that certainty, would help create demand for our corn, for example. What it would do is, by passing a law that says you can use E15 all year round, it would give consumers choice to be able to choose that, and we would not have to go to the EPA for that emergency waiver every summer. It would then give certainty to our marketers to invest in the infrastructure to distribute E15. And once again, this is something that can help mitigate high gas prices. I save 55 cents a gallon just on E10. You can save more on E15. So I encourage my Senate colleagues to take a look at this, to be able to work with my colleagues, like my senior senator from the state of Nebraska, to be able to find common ground to get this passed. We've been doing it by emergency waiver for the last 8 years. It's something we continue to do. Let's make it permanent so that we can get more investment in the infrastructure to be able to help give consumers more choice and help them reduce their fuel costs at the pump. All this would also help out our farmers and ranchers. Our farmers and ranchers are the backbone of Nebraska, and they've been the backbone of our country since its founding. We need to continue to support our farmers and ranchers. This is very important, not only for our industry of agriculture, but so that we can continue to feed our nation and indeed the rest of the world. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.